So shortly out of college, I had this job that required me to travel a lot. And I'd fly out to a client's site on Monday morning and fly back either Thursday or Friday. And this was exciting at the time because I was racking up frequent flyer miles to take trips different places, and I was seeing new things and getting my expenses paid for when I was out of town. And then there was always that anticipation as well of, you're on the plane and who am I going to sit by? What person might I meet here? And then I started to realize the type of business travelers are out there and the people who actually sit by on airplanes. But there was still some shred of that had a seed, and it became this fantasy that I had that would start when you're sitting in your seat and you look up to the front of the plane and you see this beautiful woman get on, and you think, oh baby, I hope she sits by me. And she never did. Sometimes she'd sit in front in that row, and I'd overhear these conversations that would make me want to be sitting right there. Now, I'm sure that most of the time that woman was just as boring to sit by as everybody else on the plane, but my fantasy didn't account for that. That just didn't register. And my fantasy, it wasn't some mile-high club fantasy. I would have been too afraid of getting caught for that. My fantasy had real substance to it, in that it didn't start with sex. My fantasy started with finding that kindred spirit in travel on the airplane. And we might sit by each other and start out with casual conversation, getting to know each other, and then it might get a little more and more, and then we'd have that aha moment that might go something like, oh, you were at the John Denver concert in Dayton, Ohio in 1995 too? I'm so glad we saw him before he crashed his plane and died. But that never happened either. And so, about 2 years of this, that fantasy kind of started to diminish every flight I took. Because I'd be sitting by the people that would be the talkative sales reps, that'd be the sprawlers that would, encroach on your territory, and maybe the people with BO or bad breath or something. And the best thing that came out of those was when there was just an empty seat beside me. And after about 2 years of this, I was getting on a plane, and there was somebody already sitting in the seat where mine was. And I sat down, and we started to have a good conversation, and it was looking like some pretty good potential here. But no matter how good it's going on an airplane, I'm not going to ask that girl out, because there's always that slight risk of rejection. And I'm not going to sit right next to that person for the rest of the flight, so you have to plan. And I thought, after we get off, there's the jetway, we'll be walking there. There's the concourse, plenty of time. We're sitting right by each other, we'll be walking off in the same group. Well, the crowd and the logistics conspired to foil my plan, and I missed my opportunity. And then I was relegated for several more years of these same flights, sitting by the same type of people. And my fantasy waned quite a bit. It had its ups and downs. The ups tended to be those empty seats beside me. And the downs, they were more often. And one in particular low point that I remember was on a regional jet, one of those small ones where if you're in the window seat, you already have that curvature of the side of the plane encroaching on your territory. Well, I was in that window seat, and I kid you not, in the other seat crushing me up against that was a professional wrestler. So, after that time, the fantasy had pretty much diminished, and I found myself working on a project in Singapore. And after the series of flights to get over there, I was fairly stationary, so I didn't have those opportunities. But we did have a few holidays there, and over Chinese New Year, we had a couple of days off. I booked a trip to Sumatra. So I get to the airport, and I get on the plane, and it's a full flight, but somehow I'm upgraded to first class. So that's great. So I get on the plane, and I sit down in a starboard side, window seat, bulkhead row, and that's when I look over and I see her walk on. Beautiful. And she's carrying this bambooish decorative tree-like thing. And she pauses to ask the flight attendant about storing that, and I hear her speak English, and this is good because that's the only language I know. And so she deals with that, and then she turns and she comes to sit right beside me. This is better than my fantasy could have projected. I have the beautiful woman sitting beside me. I'm in first class, so there's none of this awkward, like trying to have the conversation out of the side of your eye with people on the airplane. You know, we have room, we can kind of relax and do this and actually gesture during a conversation. Not to mention that she has this decorative plant that's right there stored at our feet. That's an easy conversation starter. I don't have to come up with some trite question or phrase to start a conversation. It's right there. I'm sure this is a gift either for someone or from someone, and there's a story there. And I'm actually genuinely interested in what this thing is. And at that point, I kind of think, wow, this is such a stark contrast to where I found myself last night. Because the night before, I had went out to this bar, brew pub, for dinner, and I had a pizza and a beer, and I'm sitting at the bar, just killing the time, relaxing while I'm waiting for my vacation to start the next day. And this guy I know shows up, and he sits down, and we start chatting and having beers, and then we play some pool and drink some beer, and play some pool and drink some beer, and have several rounds of that. And then he says, hey, have you ever been to such and such pub? Well, actually, he was Australian, so he said, hey, mate, have you ever been to such and such pub? And I said, no. And he said, well, we should go then. That's where Nick Leeson used to hang out. And so we go there, and we have some drinks there. And after a few rounds there, we're toasting to Nick Leeson's prison term. And he says, hi, mate, have you ever been to Orchard Tower? I said, no. He said, well, we should go to Orchard Tower then. I'm like, okay, let's go to Orchard Tower. So we go there, and it looks just like an office building to start, but we go up a few floors, and there's some bars up there, and we go into this bar and look around, and the first thing I notice is there's a lot of women here. And they're pretty friendly. And even in my drunken state, I could tell that these were prostitutes. Now, it's not like my friend thought we were going to go out and pick up some prostitutes. He just thought that this was a sight that an expat should see while they're in Singapore. And it was, because we have this obvious place of prostitution where everybody knows where it is, and it's actually legal, in a city-state where you are not allowed to chew gum. So it's a very interesting situation there. And so we said, like, well, we're here, we might as well at least have a drink. And so we order some drinks, and we're sitting there. And despite my body language that was saying, I really want no parts of this, so I'm going to finish this drink and leave, this one comes up to me, and she kind of backs into me and presses up against me, and then she has a cigarette in her hand, and she puts that up to my lips to give me a drag of her cigarette. And I kind of recoil from both girl and cigarette, thinking, oh, baby, no way. And shortly after that, I decide that it's time to head back to my hotel. I have an early flight. So I get back to the hotel, of course, and then back on the plane the next morning. Beautiful woman, first class seating, conversation starter there in front of us. There's one more thing with me there, though, and that relates to the drinking that happened last night. Because there were a lot of rounds of drinking, and I got back really, really late. It was 2 a.m. when I got back to my hotel room, and my flight was at 6:45. So I had the worst hangover ever. I had this screaming headache, my mouth was dry, I was so dehydrated, I was a little bit nauseous. I was still a little bit drunk at this point, but way past the fun part. So, in retrospect, I think I should be happy that I didn't have the plane spins at that point in time. And so I'm sitting there, the beautiful woman's now sitting by me, and the only thing that I want to do is put down that tray table, put my head on it, and go to sleep. But I'm tough, I'm a fighter, and so I think maybe I can pull through this here. And so I start thinking, and as she came over, you know, this all went through my head just in the time she's walking over. She goes to sit down, and I do my best to compose myself and give a nice smile and say, good morning. And she smiles and says, good morning back. And I go, okay, well, I'm past that. That's good. So, and we sit there, and I'm trying to get past my hangover and revive myself in some way. And shortly after we take off, they start serving food. And sometimes with a hangover, as most of you probably know, a good meal can really help. But I was not at that point. In fact, the eggs that I could smell being served to the rows behind me kind of made my stomach just clench up. And like, oh no. And I've been on a lot of flights through a lot of turbulence. I've been hungover for flights, and I've been a little drunk on flights, but not once have I ever had to reach for that barf bag. I was afraid that streak was about to end, and I kind of wanted to prepare, but you don't really want to pull the barf bag out and set it beside you in the ready position because that's not real attractive. And so very, very delicately and slyly, at least in my own mind, I just kind of reach forward to that pocket and I pull out the in-flight magazine and give it a quick perusal and put it back in the very back. And then I do the same with that safety card, leaving the barf bag right there in front in case I need it for easy access. Okay, that hurdle's done. And now I'm thinking about that food coming again. Like, oh no, I don't know how this is going to work out. Do I really want that here? Because the eggs, I know what those are going to do to my stomach, but there's orange juice and water on that tray, and I kind of desperately need both of those right now. And I couldn't come up with a decent way in my state to kind of say, no, I don't really want the eggs, but I'll grab those orange juices and waters and keep those right here without looking kind of like a weirdo. And at that point, with the headache still raging, I decide that this is the time to sit back and take stock of the situation and kind of reassess. And what I decide is that my goal of having this wonderful conversation and finding that kindred spirit in travel with this beautiful woman beside me, I abandon that goal. And I set a new goal. And that is to not puke in that beautiful woman's decorative bambooish tree thing sitting right there in front of us. Thank you.